Ebiko malaile tangi alaiha awe tamma tamma tangi etere te mama hiria ha ha hiria ha ha hiria ha ha hiria ha ha tokela tamma tangi e tahiti e tangi alaiha Tangi awe ebiko malaile tangi alaiha awe tangi mama etere mama hiria ha ha hiria ha ha hiria ha ha hiria ha ha sokela tangi Tahiti tangi alaiha tangi awe ebiko malaile tangi alaiha awe tangi sokela tangi Tahiti tangi alaiha tangi awe ebiko malaile tangi alaiha awe tangi tangi alaiha awe tangi We're gonna jump on the reggae train. We're gonna ride it till we go insane. We're gonna jump on the reggae train. We're gonna ride it on down the lane. Let's get going to the station of love. Grab your ticket, ain't no worries at all. There's no worries at all. People come from the world just to ride our train. Lots of love in our hearts that we all can take. Hey, that we all can take. We're gonna jump on the reggae train. We're gonna ride it till we go insane. We're gonna jump on the reggae train. We're gonna ride it on down the lane. Let's get going to the station. Oh, the station of love. Grab your ticket, ain't no worries. No worries at all. No worries at all. All aboard, climb 8 more and find you a seat.
Aloha kako, everybody. Mahalo nui loa for joining us in this 2021 Ha'olei Makahiki Hao. Thank you for participating and coming back and joining our hui here and our lahui to celebrate this short film that we have coming straight from you from a Kanaka filmmaker. So we're excited today. I hope you are too. Just a few minutes, we're getting everything prepared for you. Once we're ready to roll, you'll hear the music die down and we'll get this party started. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the QA or in the comments section below. I'll be more than happy to field those for you. I'm Stacy. You can also, if you feel more comfortable with email, my email is syoung@halavai.org. I'm also looking at that. Again, mahalo nui for joining us, and we'll be starting very, very soon.
Circling a long journey is coming your way. Pack your bags and your family. We're coming your way. We're coming your way. We're gonna jump on the reggae train. We're gonna ride it till we go insane. We're gonna jump on the reggae train. We're gonna ride it on down the lane. We're gonna jump on the reggae train. We're gonna ride it till we go insane. We're gonna jump on the reggae train. We're gonna ride it on down the lane. We're gonna jump on the reggae train. We're gonna ride it till we go insane. We're gonna jump on the reggae train. We're gonna ride it on down the lane.
Aloha kakod, mahalo nui loa for joining us. We are so excited to be showing you the film Longing for Hawaii. And we'll be starting in just a second. We do have everybody here on board. We're just waiting for a few more folks to show up. You know, we gotta make sure we capture everybody on island time. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about this or any other of our programming or with Halavai, please feel free to reach out either in the QA or the comments section. You can reach out to me directly. I am Stacy. My email is syoung@halavai.org.
Masa esa e masese. Masese, masese, masese. Oi masa esa e masese. Masese, masese, masese. Oi masa esa e masese. Yangona, yangona, yangona. Yanga ona, yangona. Tabaco, tabaco, tabaco. Tabaca, oh tabaco. Ausarara, warara, wakoyao. Rana wakoyao, rana wakoyao. Asarara, warara, rana wakoyao. Iru masese waragu. Toat. I was a fool, broke every rule, blue darling. Saw the tears that took the place of your sweet smile. My heart would break if ever I should lose you. Blue darling, you're the Lord and only one. So please, please, please forgive me. I am sorry for the wrong that I have done. My heart would break if ever I should lose you. Blue darling, you're the Lord and only one. I'll be leaving on account of you.
Aloha kako, everybody. Mahalo for joining us. We are so happy to have Katya and Ron joining us to present Longing for Hawaii. Aloha. I can turn on my Zoom too. I don't usually. Let's see. But thank you, thank you, thank you. We will be joined. Here we go by Mr. Chris Cato. And I am ready to pass it on. So thank you for joining everybody to our first Mauli of 2021. We are so excited to have you here and be launching this for Longing for Hawaii. We do have another one on the 21st, and we definitely check out halavai.org for all of the details. But right now, let's get ready, strap in for this amazing short documentary film.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Ai?
Okay. O nauna ka hala me ka leua he halele hua no ya nakano e o ka uno e ano i nei he li ane hoi o ka hiki mai hiki mai no ko hiki puno me ke aloha 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 to all of you for joining us. As Onipa'a Stacy said, this is our first Mauli Ola virtual gathering for 2021. These were a response to the pandemic as a way for the community to remain close at a distance. We are an all volunteer board. Nobody gets paid, but we work very hard for moments like these, for moments like today. So we mahalo you for supporting us. And a mahalo to friend and former Halavai board member, Deb Ku'upua Onaona McHugh, for bringing this film to our attention. And we're happy that we're able to present it and share it with you. The chant you heard is a welcome of aloha. And the ha in aloha means breath. It is the same ha that you find in two phrases that I'd like to share. Haloa kahaleo ke aloha, the house with love reaches far, or literally far reaching. And the other phrase that we have is ho'omau ka Hawai'i a ka loa. Hawaii continues and is far reaching. So tonight we're pleased to spotlight this wonderful achievement in this sense of the long breath and Hawaii in the film Longing for Hawaii. So I want to bring on our guests, filmmaker, Kanaka Maoli filmmaker, Katia Kale Baraklo, and Hawaii historian, Dr. Ron Williams Jr. Katia would like to make an offering at this time as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that chant, Chris. That was beautiful. So I'm in Yardley, Pennsylvania right now, which is where a lot of my film takes place and where I grew up. So I just wanted to quickly acknowledge that I'm located on the land of the Lenni Lenape people. The Lenni Lenape people were forcibly relocated by the United States government. And for those of you in New York City, depending on your area, we're also located on the land of the Lenni Lenape people, or the Munsee and Canarsie Lenape people. So I just wanted to pay respect to the past, present, and future of the Lenape people and encourage everybody to include Indigenous people of all tribes and nations in their decolonization work.
Mahalo. And we have Dr. Ron Williams Jr. joining us from Hawaii, a few hours behind. Would you like to just introduce yourself? Oh, I don't know how to unmute you. Can I have some help with that?
That
Oh,
was
there
my
you
fault.
go.
Oh my Ron Williams Jr. My name is Ron Williams Jr. I am broadcasting today from Ka'imuki, Hawaii, a place that I'm malihini to, a visitor to, inside of the district of Kona, the island of Oahu, and the archipelago of Hawaii. So I'm here in Ka'imuki. I'm glad to be here. As you mentioned, my field of profession is history, and native language sources in particular in Hawaii. I'm honored to be here. I thank Katya for her work on her film. I can tell you from here in Hawaii, the response has been pretty amazing as far as it's a story that touches everyone, but a topic that's sometimes difficult to talk about. So I appreciate Halavai and you, Chris, for allowing that discussion to take place today.
Mahalo. And Chris Koinoa, board member on Halavai. I also work at a film school, which was maybe I was asked to host this event. And I'm originally from Manoa, but I live here in Brooklyn for many years in Lanapehokina. So back to Katya Kalei. Is there anything we should know before we introduce the film? Anything we should help us to?
I'll just let it speak for itself. Yeah.
The film will speak for itself. And the total running time? It's about roughly about 20 minutes. Dr. Kauka, anything you'd like to set up what we're about to watch before we share the film?
If the film director's good, I'm good. So just watch. I'd ask people to kind of spend some time and focus on this. It's worth it.
Awesome. And so what I think we're going to do now is share the link to the film and invite you to start it right when you get the link, and come back and join us after the film is after it's finished. Because in our experience, the connection is better if you just watch it on your own computers or devices. And then join us back right afterwards for a post-film discussion where we'll learn some more insights into the story. So am I sharing that link, Onipa? Or
I can drop it in the chat.
oh, okay. So a link is coming. And we'll see you on the other side back here when the film is pow.
We hope.
Oh, are we playing it here? Okay. I guess we're playing it here.
Oh, okay.
Well, I was queued up to play it here, but you just mentioned.
Oh, really?
The thing, yeah. So, but you guys mentioned you'll do the link. I can do both.
I feel like the lag.
Katya and Rana.
I think there's a lag when we play it on Zoom, so it might be better if we share the link. But maybe we could also play it here so that we'll know when it's pow.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Give folks the option to stay on.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I just sent the link, but just in case some people don't know how to get back in.
Okay, so there's a link in the chat if you prefer to have a good stream. You're welcome to stay and watch it with us, but there might be some lag. So either way, we'll see you on the other side of the film. Okay, so yeah, can we go ahead and mahalo?
The Aloha license plate on the little silver Toyota Corolla in our Pennsylvania driveway is the first clue. There are other clues, too, if you know what to look for. The poi pounder on my mother's bookshelf, the Hawaiian moon calendar in our living room, the silver heirloom bracelet on my wrist. But on the East Coast, it's not until my friends are greeted by my gray-haired grandmother's beaming smile of aloha and warm embrace that they realize my roots are connected to a culture that is meaningful and different and far away.
I have to practice.
In this photograph, my sister and I, 5 and 8, were headed to Hawaii for the first time to meet our family. I don't remember many details about my first time on the islands. I just know that for as long as I can remember, being Hawaiian has been a part of my consciousness. I am Hapa, or mixed race in Hawaiian. My identity is some strange combination of my Pennsylvania suburban life and those far-off islands in the sea. Growing up in my mostly white East Coast suburb, I was questioned for not looking enough like Lilo from Lilo and Stitch. Hawaii's just a state, they'd say. You can't be Hawaiian, you look white. In my childhood, I didn't know to tell them that I am Hapa, that almost all Native Hawaiians are Hapa, and very few pure-blooded Hawaiians exist to this day due to the history of colonization on the islands. I didn't know to tell them that many other Hawaiians look just like me. I didn't know to tell them that my identity is not up for debate. My experience as a Hapa Hawaiian is becoming increasingly common. Recent research has shown that there has actually been a Native Hawaiian diaspora. 2/3 of the Native Hawaiian population live on the U.S. mainland, not in Hawaii. My sister has grappled with a split identity her whole life, too.
I would tell people, oh, I'm Hawaiian, and they're like, no, you're not. I think you just get a lot of skepticism. People, they don't like having that sense of what race is or what whiteness is, like, disrupted. I've always kind of, like, doubted who I am and felt, like, uncomfortable identifying with it. It took me a really long time to learn that you can be multiple things at once. Like, you can be white and also be Hawaiian, like, just something that coexists. The thing that I would say is, like, I'm part Hawaiian. And they're like, well, what part? Like, what percent are you? Exactly how much Hawaiian are you? And then when I got older, I learned about what blood quantum is and how that plays into everything. So it's, like, weird that people are obsessed with that without even knowing what it is. The Hawaiian Homes Commission Act was supposed to be like a government-sponsored program setting aside land for Native Hawaiians for like free or for very low prices, but in order to have access to the land, you had to prove that you had more than 50% Native blood. It's basically another way of undermining sovereignty. It's always been like, if you have genealogy that goes back to the original Hawaiian people, then you are Hawaiian.
My family is a prime example of the Hawaiian diaspora, of a split identity, a longing for a faraway homeland. My grandmother went back and forth between Wake Island and Hawaii for most of her childhood. When she was 18, she met my grandfather on Wake Island. He was stationed there for the Coast Guard. They got married and moved to the mainland.
I remember, I guess the first or the second day, I was just kind of in shock that I had left my family. And I just burst into tears because I was so homesick. I felt so alone. I miss the kind of flowers that they have. I miss the ocean. I miss the foliage, the green ferns. There's nowhere like it that is as beautiful as that. I feel an echoing when I go to of voices and all of that. And then it's so rich for me of my mom and my dad, you know, and my family. I can tell when I'm starting to miss it again, and I want to go home now. You know, when, I was away the first time for 13 years. Oh my God, I used to cry and cry and cry, you know, to be torn like that. But I've always been torn all my life, so it's just something I've accepted, you know. It's still hard. Oh, I wanted to tell you, in those days, then your father, your grandpa, didn't want to eat rice anymore. He started calling them maggots. And I said, okay, you don't have to eat rice, but the kids are going to eat rice because that's what I ate when I grew up. And so they had rice and potatoes. He didn't want me to talk about where I was from. I was conscious of him wanting to suppress my Hawaiianness, but then I rebelled. I just thought tough. I started going back to my roots. All those years, I had been following him, but then I wanted to do my own thing. I just felt it.
In an essay about indigeneity and family history, my sister wrote about the racial tensions that my grandmother experienced when my mother was born.
My mother, Denise Kawailani Barrico, was born in 1963 at the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital in New Orleans. My grandmother tried to fill out the birth certificate on her own, but the officials at the hospital quickly intervened. They asked her what her racial background was, and she told them, Hawaiian, Caucasian, and a little bit Chinese. In an oddly symbolic move that has confused my family for generations now, officials at the hospital determined that my grandmother and mother's races would be listed as Chinese, and to this day, my mother's birth certificate exists with white crossed out and Chinese handwritten in.
And it's right there, handwritten and over the top. Curious artifact of the Jim Crow South in 1963 New Orleans.
So I knew I had more Caucasian, so I picked Caucasian, but they said no. But I didn't know anything about Jim Crow, but now in retrospect and reading about it, yeah. And so it made me feel ashamed that there's this question about me being non-white.
You know what my birth certificate signifies in a way is the erasure of your actual place that you come from. You know, if I'm gonna have to check a box, at least let me check the box of who I am. And it's confusing when you don't grow up in Hawaii. You don't know who you are. You know, my mom never really talked too much about Hawaii, so it wasn't part of my consciousness. But when we moved to this little tiny town called Meadville, Pennsylvania, that was the first time I became aware that I looked different. It was a very, very white area. And so the kids kept asking me, what are you? What are you? What are you? And I was confused. I thought I was just normal American kid. And I came home and asked my mom, I said, well, what am I? What am I? They're telling me I'm Chinese. I didn't even know to say I was Hawaiian. People would always ask me, where are you from? I would say, I'm from America. You know, no, where are you from? Oh, New Jersey, I'd say. Where are you from? And then I'd say, oh, you mean, where's my mother from? Oh, my mother's Hawaiian. Oh, you're Hawaiian, I get it. You know, my mom was just seemed different to us. She would make us go to the beach, like even when there wasn't really a beach, like Lake Mead in New Mexico, which was like basically a big brown puddle. She'd make us go there and there were no waves. And then she made us go to Lake Erie, which was also really lame. And pretend that was some kind of ocean. I would be like, what are we doing here?
I sure did. I took you folks up to the beach. We had to go to the beach, and that was up at Lake Erie. And so that was my own thing. Your father says, why are you going up there? And I said, I heard there's waves up there. I'm going to take my kids swimming so they know what a wave is like.
I didn't really come to appreciate my Hawaiian heritage or anything until probably my mid to late 20s. I felt a lot of shame for being Hawaiian. They tried to annihilate us and destroy our culture. So that is not unusual that I ended up not knowing anything about my culture when I was younger, not knowing the language, not even learning the hula from my mom. That was part of the whole, colonial enterprise. My discovering my culture was also a way of becoming close to my mother and really understanding where she came from, because she came from very, very far away. It's incredible that she is where she is now, away on the East Coast, from being some barefoot girl going to school on Oahu, or, sliding down the muddy slopes of Nu'uanu, or jumping off bridges near Lapuehoi. I mean, she really comes from a very far away place, from a very different culture.
In middle school, I attended a number of cultural programs run by the Kamehameha schools for Hawaiian keiki. In the programs, I learned many Hawaiian traditions that were nearly lost. I worked on a salt farm, danced the hula, chanted and sang songs in Hawaiian, and worked in the lo'i kalo, or taro patch.
I remember the sky, the beauty of the sky, and just the solemnness of it all. And it just felt like we were channeling our ancestors. It was sad, but it was beautiful. And I just thought, wow, we're really connected to these ancient people. And we almost lost it.
How do you reconcile with the fact that your land has been stolen, your history hidden, your culture nearly extinguished?
Unfortunately, the colonization efforts in Hawaii were extremely successful in terms of all of that. I mean, it didn't wipe out the sense of ohana and the more everyday culture of Hawaii, but the sense of Hawaii as a nation with a political history, that has pretty much disappeared. Very few people know about it.
My family only learned the whole truth about the unjust annexation a few years ago. It all started because a group of non-Hawaiian sugar barons and businessmen wanted to overthrow the Hawaiian kingdom to avoid paying tariffs on sugar. As this group of haoles gained power on the islands, they took away many rights from the native Hawaiians. Queen Liliuokalani, the last reigning monarch of the Kingdom of Hawaii, fought to restore rights back to the native Hawaiians by proposing a new constitution. However, in 1893, the haoles staged a coup. The Hawaiian people wanted to fight back for their sovereignty. Liliu called on U.S. President Cleveland to reinstate her as monarch. Cleveland told Liliu that he would reinstate her if she were to grant amnesty to her overthrowers. But the Queen refused. Queen Liliu abdicated her throne to protect her people from bloodshed. On August 12, 1898, without any say from the native Hawaiian people, the U.S. passed a joint resolution to annex the Kingdom of Hawaii, which only required a simple majority vote. Many experts and historians say that this is not a legal way to annex a sovereign nation. After the annexation, the new haole government held a ceremony at Iolani Palace. The flag of the Hawaiian Kingdom was taken down, and the American flag was raised in its place. Most native Hawaiians refused to attend this event. That day, Queen Liliuokalani sat in her Washington palace, wearing all black to mourn her lost kingdom. My great-great-great-grandfather, William Punohu Aveoveo Ula Okalani White, was a right-hand man to Queen Liliuokalani. Yet for 92 years, his grave had no headstone. My family only discovered his pivotal role in Hawaiian history 2 years ago, after piecing together old stories.
The medal was in the case at my grandparents' house, and my grandfather had inherited the medal from his father, William Punohu White.
So one day, I see this picture of a very upstanding gentleman, and somehow this guy is tied to this medal. This is William Punohu Aveoveo Ula Okalani White. There's no history books, there's no nothing. It's just me just trying to trace this stuff down. I find that there's this history professor, Ron Williams. He'd written an article about William Punohu. And I emailed him, and that subject was great-great-granddaughter of William Punohu White. And so we began this back and forth exchange. So he co-wrote the Constitution with Joseph Navahe that was attempting to restore rights to the Native Hawaiians. And he calls him the Thomas Jefferson of Hawaii. And we're like totally blown away. Like, what? And he said that the history had been erased. He had been a senator, a lawyer. They outlawed the language. The scholars couldn't read the Hawaiian language newspapers anymore. If you read the autobiography of Queen Liliuokalani, you will find references to our relative in there, which we didn't even know.
Ron Williams led an effort that raised enough money to put a headstone on William Punohu White's grave. In early August of 2017, about 200 people, including myself and many members of White's extended ohana, showed up to witness the unveiling of the headstone. By the end of the day, the grave was almost completely covered in flowers and lace, offerings of respect, love, aloha. At the ceremony, Williams taught us that we had much to be proud of. I never knew that the Kingdom of Hawaii was so progressive. In 1840, King Kamehameha III was the first absolute monarch to voluntarily give up 2/3 of his power to establish a constitutional monarchy. In 1852, some 13 years before the U.S. outlawed slavery, universal male suffrage was granted to all races in Hawaii. In 1881, King Kalakaua was the first monarch to circumnavigate the globe. Iolani Palace had electricity before the White House. The list goes on. On that day in August, as I stood in Ka'ahumanu Cemetery, I couldn't help but think of the words of King Kamehameha III. Ua mau ke'ea o ka aina I ka pono. The life of the land is perpetuated in the righteousness of the people. It is now the kuleana of the Native Hawaiian people to rewrite our history, to share the courageous, inspiring story of our lost nation and its forgotten heroes. William Punohu Aveoveo Ula o Kalani White is no longer a lost hero of the Kingdom of Hawaii. His legacy will live on, his story will be told, and his headstone will stand proudly in the Hawaiian sun for years and years to come.
Auntie Samantha?
What a nice surprise. You were doing some documentary or something.
Oh yeah, going to the Kamehameha schools camps helped my sister and I learn a lot about Hawaiian culture. You paid for them, so I just wanted to ask why it was important to you.
It's sharing. It's sharing. And just, I'm not really sure. It's just a gift. Your grandma, your mom, who was designated as Chinese when she was in Louisiana.
Right.
Being part Hawaiian, hello, it's like we weren't even known.
Right.
And that matters to me. They didn't teach us this. They didn't teach us this. Yep. They did a good job in making me so freaking howly. I don't even speak pidgin, but I'm proud to be who I am.
Yeah.
Proud to be who I am. And my culture, my ancestors, I honor them. I honor them.
Right.
I'm glad you remember and have a connection to where you've come from. And when and if you have children, I hope you share that with them. Because this will always be home for them.
Okay, maybe we'll give it a minute or two for those who are rejoining the Zoom. And I see we've grown a few. We are at 31 participants now.
By the way, Katya, your pronunciation of your kupuna's name is perfect. I'm impressed.
Oh, it took a few.
That wasn't the first cut.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, and if and when you have children, what a great film to also show them, you know, that they'll eventually see someday. So okay, I think we'll assume that everyone is rejoining the Zoom. Mai ne o pele mai ai no o pola mai ka pu no hua kane mai ke o la pai kala ni mai ke o pua la pa ku I Hawai'i ka wahine o pele. So we may not all travel by canoe these days, but like the Fire family, that Pele and Hi'iaka, who migrated from Tahiti to Hawaii, we still have migrations today of Kanaka Mauli from Hawaii to Turtle Island, the US mainland, and really around the world. So like the volcano continues to erupt, the migrations also continue. And this chant was, for those who are interested, Kahua Ka'ia Pele, the coming of Pele. And with that, we really wanted to encourage our Hawaii diaspora in attendance to leave your comments and questions in the chat as we start our post-film discussion, because really this event is to honor you folks as well and your ohana and your stories. So with that, we'll move into our Q&A. So let me navigate some windows.
I got you covered. If you want to just go ahead with some of the start, I'll let you guys know if there's some Q&A questions that come up.
Wonderful. Yeah, and maybe while we're talking, it might conjure up some questions or thoughts. But before we continue, just a mahalo again to Deb Ku'upua Onaona McHugh, if you're there. I see you in the chat. Actually, we really appreciate you bringing this film to our attention. So mahalo ho. Okay, so I guess we'll start. Well, you know, we have Dr. Ron Williams Jr. here, and returning actually, because this is your second Halavai event with us. We were very fortunate to have you join us for the La Ku'oko'a, the Future of Hawaii event in November. And all these Mauli Ola gatherings are eventually going to be archived and posted on our website. And I believe we're working on a YouTube channel. So you can go back and visit the ones you missed. Ron Williams was wonderful to speak about the Hawaii's national holiday in November, back in November. But welcome back, Ron. And we want to ask, how exactly did you find out where William White was buried?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's actually a great story. So, you know, in my work, I work with native language sources, and I work in Hawaiian history, mostly in the kingdom period. And in my work, I'm the type that always has 10 projects going on. You know, it's just how I work. I've always got this project and that project and so forth. But there's always a specific voice, a specific project that makes itself known. And I think that's, you know, because it's the right time, it's the right person and so forth. But but in the midst of all these projects, I start to William White starts to reappear again and again and again in my research. And so I said, okay, I guess it's time to work on William. And so I started to investigate him in the Hawaiian language newspapers. and I found a completely different story than what was in the English papers. In the first place, he was kind of not very much mentioned at all in the English language papers. And I bumped into a historian. I had asked most of the historians I knew in Hawaii, and no one had ever even heard of him. One gentleman who's very well known, who I won't mention his name, but he said, oh yeah, he was a rascal. He had done, he was a snake oil salesman and this and that. And, I said, oh, okay. But I went through the Hawaiian language newspapers and I started to listen to Hawaiian voices about him and realized that he was a patriot. He was one of their heroes. And not for no reason. He had become a lawyer in the 1860s in Hawaii. He was known by the name Bill Aila in Makololo, Hawaii, in Hawaiian, which means oil bill. And to Hawaiians, that meant that he could speak smoothly, like he gave great speeches and people loved to listen to him. Well, the Haole papers translated that as snake oil salesman, right? That he was lying. So it's a different interpretation of culture there. But nonetheless, William was one of the senators who was well known in Hawaii, was one of the greatest speakers known, and became central to the Queen's efforts to change the Constitution and bring power back to Kanaka Oiwi, back to Hawaiians. He helped write that Constitution, as Katya mentioned in her film, with Joseph Navahi. So now I realize how important he is, and I want to get to know him. I gave a talk on Joseph Navahi at the Judiciary Building in Honolulu downtown, where the Supreme Court is. And I gave a talk there one night as part of a public history program. And I had talked about Joseph Navahi all night long. And when I finished, and it was time for question and answer, a few questions came up. And then a gentleman stood up in the back, a wonderful older gentleman who in kind of shorts and a kind of bus-up t-shirt, and just stout guy there. And all he said was, "Thank you for your work. Thank you for telling us about Joseph Navahi. He and other heroes like William White need to be more well known." And I was like struck. I was like, "Oh my God, this guy knows William White? Like nobody knows William." So I do this. I talk to people, and I'm trying to hook up with this gentleman, and I did. And it turns out he was a descendant of William Punahou White. Yeah, he passed about 4 or 5 years ago, but he was an amazing, amazing man. And I started to sit with him and share with him the information I had about William, but also listen to stories he had. And if you're Hawaiian, or if you're from here and have done this work, you kind of sit back and listen more than you ask questions. And so I did, and we would meet on the Queen's Summer Palace grounds. Because the White family had property there. And so we would meet on the Summer Palace grounds, and I would just sit there and listen to his stories and gather his stories. Just an amazing, amazing, time. And one day, about 5 weeks in, he asked me. He also liked to meet at Kalihi McDonald's. That was one of his favorite places to meet. So we'd meet there. But he asked me one time. He said, "Ron," he said, "is there anything you want to know? Like, what are you looking to find out?" And I had never found his gravesite. It was a mystery. I had been through all of the grave listings. I'd been through the papers. I'd been through everything, and I couldn't find a gravesite for him. It said maybe he left Hawaii and was buried in California. We really didn't know. His wife was buried at Ka'ahumanu Cemetery, but we couldn't find him at all. And so I asked him the question, and he looked at me and he said, "I'll take you there next Saturday." And I was like, wow, like he knows where he is. So his niece picked me up, and we drove and picked him up, and we drove, and we went up here, we turned up School Street, and we went to Ka'ahumanu Cemetery. And I was like, "No, I've been here, I've checked here, I didn't say that out loud. But we get out of the car and we walk over, and next to his wife, he points at the ground and he says, "That's where he is, right there." And I'll admit to you something embarrassing but honest, is that I wasn't sure. I said, "Oh, everyone's got a story. Every uncle you run into has a story. But if he's one of the greatest patriots in Hawaiian history. Why would he not have a gravestone? He's sitting right there." So I said, "Thank you, Uncle," and we went back and we talked and so forth. And then I got a hold of the Ka'ahumanu Society, and I asked them if they had a plan for their graveyard, and they said, yeah, they've got the original plans, plus plans from the 1890s and plans from 1910 and so forth. And I met with them. They broke out the plan, and that's where he sat. William Punahou White was right there. So, so for me, the story of finding his grave was a small part of this understanding that he was driving everything, you know, and that continues on to today, even with Katya's film. So I had promised him two things. I had promised him, number one, to get William White better known, and number two, that we were going to get a gravestone for him. And this was 10 years before it happened. And I wrote an article in the Hawaiian Journal of History about William Punahou White, and he was on the cover of the journal and so forth. It was chosen as the cover article and so forth. So that was the first step, and he was ecstatic and joyful, and I had felt like I had fulfilled half of my kuleana.
Yeah.
He ended up, you know, he was struggling financially and things like this, and he ended up going to the Philippines, where he had family and so forth. And so he was living in the Philippines, and we would call. And he passed away. You know, he passed away. But I kept going, and there's there's an understanding with these stories that aren't yours. This isn't, what part of this is my kuleana to do. So you kind of wait for a sign. And there was a period of 3 weeks, about 5 years ago, when I was doing things where William would pop up. I was in the Foodland by my house one night about 1 a.m, and nobody else in the entire store except for me and one other guy in line. And he had some poke with inamona, right? And I was sitting behind him. He's an older Hawaiian Japanese man. And I kind of leaned over and I said, "Hey, brother, where'd you get the poke with inamona?" He's like, "Oh, it's back there. Still get. So I was like, "Oh, okay." And he looks at me and he goes, "Hey, you Ron Williams?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Hey, you write a story about William White?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, that's my kapuna." And he said to me, true story, he said to me, "I had a dream 2 nights ago about William, and he was supposed to have a headstone, and he's a carver." He's like, "And I was carving his headstone."
Wow.
He didn't know that he didn't have a headstone. He had never been out there, didn't know this. But he said, "I had this dream that we're supposed to put this headstone." So I was taken aback. I said, "Wow." He runs out to his car. He brought me fish. He gives me some fish. And we separated. 2 days later, Doug White, who was my contact here in the islands, who works for HICO, called me and said, "Ron," he said, "I had a dream 2 nights ago about Michael Puna. We're supposed to get his headstone done." So now it's obvious. I didn't know how, sorry the story is so long. I didn't know how we were supposed to do it. My daughter, who's tech literate, said, "Dad, do a GoFundMe." I said, "Hey, what's that?" She said, you go online. I'm like, "I don't like ask for money," and So, okay, we'll try it. So we put it online. I said, "Here's William White's story. We need to get him a headstone. If you're interested and you want to help out." Within 4 days, we raised over $9,000. And so for me, that's another thing that speaks to that ono, that voraciousness, that appetite that people in Hawaii have for their history, for bringing back those stories of the kupuna. So we raised $9,000. We bought a beautiful marble headstone. The family designed it. We said, let's reach out to the family and bring them here. And that's how Katya and her family came to know him and their story and so forth. And so it's all, it's all of these connections that I believe strongly come from William Punahou Ave'oveo Ulukalani White saying, "It's time to hear my story." So that's the long story.
Yeah, you're definitely guided by ancestors. And Katya, so up until this time, you had, like, Ron had met your ohana, but you hadn't probably met those ohana, right? Because
yeah, we had talked to Ron a little bit about just like the history of Hawaii, like in general, and then when we found out with all this stuff about William Punahou White was when we started to like piece together all the little family myths that we had, like my grandmother talks about in the film. The medal, like this like myth of having this medal in some case somewhere that like my grandmother may or may not have seen like as a kid. And it all sort of like came together, just all these like family stories with what we learned from Ron.
Oh, and I can just to add about the medal, what it is, people might be wondering. So on January 14th, 1893, 3 days before the overthrow, the Queen met with Joseph Navahi and William Punahou White in the blue room of the palace, of Iolani Palace. And she bestowed on them Knight's Order of Kalakaua, which is the highest award in the kingdom that you could bestow on an individual. And so she gives them this award for their work in writing the new Constitution. Many people have on the Caucasian side have vilified, and on the Hawaiian side have honored the Queen for coming up with this Constitution. But in actuality, she was reticent to do so. She wasn't sure if it would work, if it was the right time, and so forth. And she says in her book that it was William Punahou White and Joseph Navahi that convinced her to do this. So this was really these two native patriots who were arguing for the Lahui, for the people, that this should happen, that made it all happen. And they got the award. They were the last people awarded royal orders in the Hawaiian Kingdom.
Incredible. I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit. Ron, what are Hawaiian Patriot cards, and how can our community collect them too?
So a project I had an idea for and that came to fruition finally last year was the Kaleka Kanakawiwi Ho'eloha Aina, which are the Native Hawaiian Patriot cards. I was frustrated.
Kind of like baseball cards?
Yeah. I was frustrated with attempts to get information, new research into classrooms. The DOE, bless their hearts, moves at a glacial pace. And so I said, hey, I'm just going to make something from my primary source resources and see if Kumu want it. And if Kumu want it, they'll bring it in their classroom. And so I decided to start with 10 Native Hawaiian patriots, 5 women and 5 men. Mm-hmm. And I took my 20 years of research, primary sources, and I put information on the back about their birth, their death, what they had done, documentation, and so forth. And I wanted to offer them for free. I didn't want to make any money, and I didn't want it to cost anything. I didn't want there to be any barriers between returning these mo'olelo to the haumana. And so I, again, difficultly, that's such a word, asked for help. And really quickly, people responded. 2 people in particular came out and gave me a chunk of money and said, go produce them. And then I put it up on Facebook, and the outpouring was amazing. It's the Lahui that gets this $20 check, $15 check, $100 check, $40 check. And I raised money to produce the cards, stuffed them in my living room, put a little insert with them, and asked Kumu if they wanted them. My goal was to put out 10,000 cards. I said, if I can get 10,000 cards into classrooms, I'll be incredibly stoked. We just recently passed 50,000. So we have these cards now in 75 different classrooms around Hawaii, over 50,000 cards of students learning the histories of their kupuna and their heroes. And William's one of those heroes. So for people, so here's the downside is that it's a one-man operation. And so unfortunately, I can't mail them out to individuals yet. I got hundreds of requests, and I just literally cannot do that physically. If you're a kumu and you have a class, or you're a hui and you have a study group and so forth, and you want 10, 20, 30, 50.
Institutional kind.
Right.
Yeah.
Then please do email me, and I'll be happy to send them out to you. I've got plenty.
Do you have
get out
a sample nearby, or?
Yeah. So this is the William card.
Oh.
Is the information, and you'll see folks like Emma Nakawina, who was likely the first woman curator of a national museum anywhere in the world. She was the curator of the Hawaiian National Museum. You'll see John Henry Wise, who was the first Kanaka Oiwi to play football in America. He played for a somewhat well-known coach named John Heisman in 1892 in Oberlin, Ohio. You'll see folks like Mrs. Navahi, great patriot who ran the newspapers. Her husband, Joseph Navahi, Kahalavai Cummins, John Cummins, the author of Aipohaku, Kalanapua, undergrad, Timoteo Hatlilio, and finally Mrs. Abigail Campbell. So you'll get all 10 of those cards. You'll get a little insert that tells you about the cards and how they might be used, and it's absolutely free.
Wow.
Beautiful work, beautiful.
Absolutely, mahalo nui loa, Ron, for that. Oh my gosh, Chicken Skin has seen all of the work that you've done and how the Lahui has pulled together. Same type of Chicken Skin we get with about watching Katya's film. Absolutely amazing, and like Ron, you had mentioned to the beginning, a story that is often not approached as much. And I want to thank Deb for bringing this to our attention. And Deb, you have your mic on. You mentioned that you raised your hand to say something, so I wanted to give you some space and time.
Well, I just wanted to say that when I first met Katya, it was really through emails. I believe we'd already started the lockdown for COVID. She sent out an email to some of the members of the staff at Sarah Lawrence College, letting them know about that her film was chosen for the International Festival in Hawaii. And she sent a link to the film. And because I'm Hawaiian, and I think I might be the only Hawaiian on staff at Sarah Lawrence, anyone who gets anything about Hawaii sends me the email. And that's how I got Katya's email. And I watched the film and I thought, my God, this young woman who works on who's a student on my campus is going through the things I went through in the 60s. And this is 2020, you know? And I am so proud of her. And I am so sad that COVID keeps us from being able to embrace, because we've had such similar experiences of growing up in the diaspora, and it's lonely. And I felt that from her. I felt in her loneliness, in this struggle to own her Hawaiianness, you know, that I spent a lifetime doing that. I was so happy that she was able to do that at a much younger age. And hopefully, Katya, I hope that this just will continue to grow in your filmmaking. And I wanted to know if you had any other plans, if this has stirred up some other projects.
Mahalo, Deb. That's so nice. Yeah, I think I definitely want to continue making films about my Hawaiian heritage, whether that be documentary or narrative. I'm like thinking of some new ideas in COVID. You know, I have to like graduate first, but I'm definitely thinking of some projects for when I get back to school because I'm doing a gap year now. But I think just like what Deb said is something that I have found to be really amazing throughout this experience, because I think like being a part of this like Hawaiian diaspora, I didn't even know that the Hawaiian diaspora was a thing until making this film and doing some research. I didn't know that other people were experiencing what I was experiencing. I just, you know, I thought that I had this like weird kind of life of like, you know, I grew up in Pennsylvania. The only Hawaiians around me who I knew were like my mom, grandmother, and sister. And so I think that like, that's one of the greatest things that's come out of this experience for me is like, it's surprising people saying to me like, wow, your film echoes my experience, but it's also kind of like a beautiful, beautiful way to connect and feel a little bit less alone with all these like strange Hapa identity feelings.
Mahalo.
Deb, did you want to, mahalo, Deb. Wonderful to connect with you as well.
Yeah.
Did you want to share your blog with us as well?
I write a blog. It's called whitehawaiian.blog. It's really, I became a grandmother 4 years ago. And one of the things Katya brings up in her film is the whole idea of blood quantum. And I remember when my grandmother died, who was full-blooded Hawaiian, I cried, I wept because I thought how many stories died with her. And I really felt when I was Katya's age, I really felt that there were not going to be Hawaiians, that mathematically one day there would be no Hawaiians. And so when my grandson came along, I thought, oh, I have to start writing my stories for him because I don't look Hawaiian the way people want Hawaiians to look. And he's certainly not going to look Hawaiian the way people want Hawaiians to look. So, you know, you don't know what an obstacle that can be when you're trying to hang on to your identity when people keep defying it. You know, when they say, oh, well, you weren't born in Hawaii, so how can you be Hawaiian? You know, because they associate your
Mhm.
cultural heritage with the state of Hawaii. But that's why I started writing whitehawaiian.org, because I wanted to give the stories of my ohana to my grandchild.
whitehawaiian.org or
Yeah.
.blog?
.blog, sorry,
.blog, yeah.
whitehawaiian.blog. Yeah, I can put it, well, I don't know if I can put it in the chat, but
Oh yes.
Yeah,
yeah,
we'll
I
share
can,
it in the show notes. Yeah,
yeah,
after.
okay.
Yeah. Oh, we have
Beautiful.
another.
We do. We have another. We have another guest that would like to speak. So David.
Hi.
David, do you want
Aloha, David.
to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Oh, you're just muted. Yeah. There's a button in your lower left control panel. Should be.
While he figures out how to unmute himself, I'll just say that I read some of Deb's blog. It's really great. And I think the point about blood quantum that she brings up is so interesting because, like, I remember as a kid, I used to think to myself, like, whoa, like, what am I going to do if I can't, like, have kids with somebody who's Hawaiian? Because, like, otherwise my kids aren't going to be Hawaiian. And, like, looking back, that's a funny thought. But it's like, I just think this, like, colonial idea of like blood quantum and this like, you know, perception of what a Hawaiian has to look like is such an, you know, outdated colonial concept. And I really appreciate that. I think this next generation of Native Hawaiians are, you know, challenging these colonial ideas that are put in our head.
Mahalo. So everyone, for those in attendance, this is an unplanned event, having additional guests in the Zoom. David, if you can hear me, maybe you want to leave your comments or questions in the chat if you can't navigate your mic, and hopefully we can circle back to it. We haven't gotten to Katya yet, and so I wanted to kind of segue into this. You know, in making the film, it screened at the Hawaii International Film Festival, as Deb was mentioning. And in your post-film discussion with our friend Ciara Lacey, you described how you were allowing the emotional story and the story in the film to help dictate the selection and curation of the historical archival materials that were, you know, outside of your family. So how much of that materials was through the Hawaii State Archives? How much was just Google Images, and what was that journey like?
Yeah, so actually, I think if I had known about the Hawaii State Archives website back then, I would have been a little bit better off, let me tell you. But I definitely like went down a really deep like internet rabbit hole. I could not tell you where I even was. Like, I think Wikimedia Commons is one of the places where I found a lot of those historical images. But yeah, I definitely just like dug and dug and dug. And I think that it was really incredible for me finding some of those pictures because I hadn't seen them, particularly when I found the photograph of the Hawaiian flag being taken down on the day of the overthrow of the Queen. And then after that, the picture of Iolani Palace with like all the crowds of people on that day with the then American flag, and then Queen Liliuokalani mourning, wearing all black. That was like the caption that I found of the photograph. That was like a really moving moment for me because I hadn't seen those photographs. Yeah, but I think that just the process was pretty difficult because I think there's such a lack of resources that you can really rely on if you Google for Hawaiian history. I mean, I think that like, particularly for the historical elements, most of the research from that is like notes that I took at Ron Williams's presentation in 2017, because if you just like Google what happened to Queen Liliuokalani with like the annexation and everything, like you're gonna find the, you know, colonial version of the story. And I think that, you know, speaks to the importance of, you know, using primary sources and knowing the Hawaiian language as Ron does. I think that makes a big difference.
If we could pass it back to Ron just for a moment, because there is this question as folks are embracing Hawaiian language studies, there's this question of like, what are you studying Hawaiian for, and what is the value in it? And we're curious to know, are more historians trying to learn the Hawaiian language now?
Yeah, well, that question came up, you know, for me, of course, you know, what are you going to do with that degree? And everyone else, and every Hawaiian student,
like Sanskrit or something.
But it's really it's really out of ignorance, because there is an incredible, even if you think about it just in a pragmatic sense, like there are incredibly important cultural reasons why you should do this to keep the language alive and so forth. But even if you just think about it in a pragmatic sense, there are people begging for now, because it's become a thing, right? So whether it's DLNR, whether it's the National Park Service, whether it's this, whether it's that, whether it's a private institution, everybody is getting caught without knowing anything about their history and asking for Hawaiian language interpretation. So it's a great field to go into. The thing I can tell you that's the good news is there are thousands of children enrolled in the Hawaiian language immersion schools that were across Hawaii who are graduating and coming out with this, you know, knowledge that surpasses most of us, right? And this ability. My daughter was in immersion for 12 years. And to see her and her classmates, you know, there's a whole army of folks who are going to be digging into these papers and listening to Hawaiian voice. You know, the Hawaiian Language Archive, the published Hawaiian Language Archive is most likely the largest indigenous archive in the world in native writing. There were over 100 Hawaiian language newspapers, over 125,000 pages of Hawaiian language voice, and that's just newspapers. When you talk about legal documents, you talk about correspondence, it's just amazing. So yes, there are lots and lots of folks studying it now. There are lots of stories being heard. And that connection, you know, is what's allowing folks like Katya to start to wonder what their past is. And if I could, I'd ask, you know, I would throw the question out there to Katya and maybe Professor McHugh. You know, there are generational differences in this diaspora. As the professor mentioned earlier, you know, she felt like she was the only one. That history of Kanaka Uivi and the displacement of a people, of a nation from their history started in 1900. And so by the 40s and 50s and 60s, not only had the powers that be distanced Hawaiians from their history, but they had also gotten Hawaiians to not want to go back there, right? It's that self-identity that starts to change. Ask anyone in Hawaii in the 1940s and 50s and 60s what it meant to be Hawaiian. And they'll tell you, oh, it's, you know, the guys that do the civil servants jobs and not so smart and lazy and those kind of attributes to a nation that was one of the most progressive modern nations on earth in the 19th century. So the work that was done was to remove them physically from their narrative by outlawing the language, and also get them to not even want to go back there. So kupuna that I've talked to that grew up in the 30s and 40s and 50s say, we had no desire to be Hawaiian. You know, so Katya is blessed to grow up in an era now when it's cool to be Hawaiian, and for lack of a better word, and that the truth is coming out, and that's because of those voices. So I'd be super interested in hearing from Katya and from the professor how they saw Hawaiianness and their part in that diaspora.
Yeah, I think that's like a really important point, the like generational differences. That's definitely something that I've thought of a lot. I think it took me a long time to like come to terms with like what even am I in just like the simplest terms. And I think I definitely think all the time that I'm really lucky to be have this information, because I feel like it's given me definitely a sense of cultural pride. But I know that a lot of the things that I was able to do, like for example, I went to the 3 years of the Kamehameha summer exploration camps, and I got to do all those cultural activities. My mom didn't get to do that, one generation above me. My grandmother didn't get to do that. My Auntie Samantha, in the last scene of the film, she went to Kamehameha schools for high school, but even like she will say they didn't teach us this. Like that's what she says in the thing. So I
Can't
think
even speak pigeon.
exactly.
What's the line?
Yeah. And I think that really speaks to also why it's so important to learn the language and learn things about the culture. And just going back to Ron's point on language, something that I didn't get to fit into the film, but which I thought was really interesting was that, and Ron, correct me if I'm wrong, because this is something that you have said in the past, but like, I don't know all the details, but the English language newspaper had said that the day of the Queen's ouster, William Punohu White was on the steps of Iolani Palace trying to incite the natives to violence. But the Hawaiian language newspaper said that he was like calming the natives down or something. And I think that really speaks to like what a huge importance it is to know these things like the Hawaiian language to help you actually what really happened, because it has such a huge impact on just the historical narrative as a whole of who we are.
Can I say something? First of all, thank you for elevating me to a position of professor. I'm actually part of the administrative staff. I work in the enrollment office, but I am the professor of my life and also the archaeologist of our history. My experience is a little different than Katya's because my grandmother, my full-blooded Hawaiian grandmother, came when I was 5 years old to the East Coast and helped raise us, my brothers and myself. So we had the presence of the one and only full-blooded Hawaiian in all of the Washington, D.C. area, which became a point of attraction to anyone else coming through the area from the islands. They would always make it a point to see Auntie Abby, as she was known. My mother was a hula dancer, and so we were taught hula when we were young. And she was part of the Hawai'i State Society, which brought together a lot of Pacific peoples, people related to Pacific peoples. And she was also worked for Senator Fong and the Hawaiian congressional offices at the time, and I still think they are very close. And so I grew up in an era where Senator Fong and Senator Inouye were representing Hawaii, and we were always in that milieu. And so I do, Hawaiianness in my house was culturally, it was very present. My mother told me my Hawaiian name, which was given to me by my great-grandmother in a birth chant. She said, Deborah, when you go to school, you learn to write that on the board and you will not be forgotten. And I did. Everyone knows my Hawaiian name that ever knew me in school, up to my professors in college. That wasn't the problem for me. The problem was, I think when I was 17 years old, I spent the summer at University of Hawaii, and I took my first Hawaiian history course. And this is when I learned about colonization. And I really learned the history of what happened to our people. And it was earth-shattering. And it took a long time to come up with an effective response to that. You know, am I just part of a nice culture, you know, a touristy culture now? Do I have a history? Do I have a country that I can claim as my own? And then you get into the whole blood quantum thing that continually gets pushed on you as part of your identity. And even on my campus, where we have discussions about diversity and people of color, I would never be considered to be a part of those discussions, which is kind of odd, but it happens. So even though Katya and I come from different generations and different perspectives, I think that I was I grew up in a generation where Pearl Harbor was still the identifying historical event of the century. And I think Katya's generation can move beyond that. And maybe that's what will make, maybe that's the story of the future, where we can get out of that identifying Hawaii. The way I grew up with it is just so centered around the events of World War II.
Mm-hmm. Mahalo. Mahalo, Deb.
Yeah, I definitely I feel like I have a lot of hope for our generation. I mean, it's been a long, even for me, like a long journey to learn all this, like growing up, people would just be like, no, you're not Hawaiian. What are you talking about? Hawaii's a state. Like they just didn't know very, very basic things. And I think that it took me a long time to learn all of the things I needed to know in order to respond to those appropriately. Like I didn't even know the answer. I was like, I feel like what you're saying is wrong, but like, what can I say back? And so I think, yeah, learning that is so important.
Maybe we could invite our audience to leave the microaggressions they've heard growing up in the comments. Maybe they'll sound familiar. Well, I want to go back to a moment in your film where your grandmother mentions when she's home in Hawaii. Of course, it's beautiful, but she mentioned that the echoing and voices return. And could you share a little bit more about that moment in the film?
Yeah, I think that was definitely one of the moments that I found to be the most emotional in the film, because I think what she's talking about is something that is really difficult to put into words at times. It's this like spiritual connection to the land of Hawaii. And I think that's something that a lot of Native Hawaiian people feel. And I think it comes along with this like reverence and this like sadness, because it's almost like it's what we've lost, right? Like we've lost the rights to our land. It's like being taken from us all the time through like tourism, even like Mark Zuckerberg, through the government, just through so many different ways. But at the same time, it's like the land of our ancestors, and there's this pull there. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what she's referencing, just the like almost this like spiritual feeling of feeling like all of your ancestors are there with you in certain moments.
Mm-hmm. Mahalo. And the film ends with that telephone call with Auntie Samantha, and it kind of leaves the audience contemplating what home is for them. And we're just curious to know what some of the reactions have been for the film that may have surprised you, whether it's from within the diaspora or just non-Hawaiians. How's the reactions been?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I definitely think like for me, the most surprising reaction is that like people relate to it because, I mean, like Deb said, like we were on the same, I don't know, a lot of you might not know Sarah Lawrence, but it is like the tiniest school ever. It literally has 1,000 students. And I didn't know that there was another Native Hawaiian person in Sarah Lawrence admin. So I think that I've just been so blessed to have this, feel like it's bringing together more of a community for me. I think, it's felt like a lonely experience to not really know where you fit in necessarily, because in Hawaii, you're not Hawaiian enough, but on the East Coast, your friends don't understand your culture at all. And it's like this split identity, and to know that people relate to that it's really moving to me, I think.
Mahalo. And just switching back to Ron, have ohana of other forgotten heroes reached out to you as well, or what's next for you? What is calling you now or reappearing on your radar?
Lots of projects, but you know, it usually ends up being from the kupuna that way. And what I mean by that is it's usually the kupuna's voice that calls, and then you go out and try to find family. There's a gentleman that I'm working on now named William Henry Daniels, who's Papa again. And it's just, he's got an amazing story. And so, you know, when you start to do the research and you start to dig and things come up, then that type of stuff happens where you're at the store and you bump into somebody and they're like, oh, my next door neighbor's a Daniels, and so forth. And, you know, you meet them and then it grows. And that's how it usually happens. I mean, William Daniels was a judge in Wailuku who, Maui, who was prominent. He was a royalist, and after the overthrow, he refused to take the oath to the new government. And so he was removed from the bench. The Hawai'i and the foreign population wrote petitions into the legislature saying, we bring him back, he's the best judge in the islands. But the government refused. When the Wilcox Rebellion started in 1895, besides the folks that were arrested on the battlefield, the government went out and basically arrested all the top Hawaiians from around Hawaii. Over 400 men, judges, lawyers, you know, everybody were arrested and charged with conspiracy and treason and so forth. Mm-hmm. And William Daniels was one of those men arrested. He had nothing to do with it, but so he goes to prison. He loses everything. He owned a third of Kaho'olawe. He owned Maui Fruit and Taro Company. Very well done, businessman. He lost everything, went bankrupt. He had 10 kids, and he's writing to his wife. I've got letters from his prison where he writes his wife and says, how are you feeding the kids? So he's released from prison early. He can't get a job because he's blackballed. And he finally takes a menial job on the water ditch up in upcountry Maui. And so here's this Hawaiian who's brilliant, who's achieved, who's a pillar of the community, who now can't get the most menial of jobs. He moves his family to Huelo. And then about a year after his release from prison, in the Hawaiian language newspapers, there's the mo'olelo of him getting his paycheck, going out, giving his money to his friends in the field. He goes home to his house and he takes his own life. And there's a lot of kamaha there. There's that heaviness there. But what that story for me tells is this idea of the sacrifice that Kanaka Iwi made for their nation. We've heard the story of the Royal Hawaiian Band, how they refused to play and they lost their jobs, but Hawaiians lost their lives also, and lost, you know, so these stories of loss out of the overthrow and out of the arrest and imprisonment of Hawaiians, which by the way, started that legacy of Hawaiians as prisoners that continues today, right? Mm-hmm. I was giving a talk on these prisoners in Hilo about a year ago, and I have photos of their booking photos. And I played them, and a good friend of mine was in the audience, and his wahine starts just bawling. And I was like, I felt bad, but I went and talked to her afterwards, and she told me, she said, I saw my great-grandfather and realized that was the first generation of my family that was in prison. So these issues of Hawaiian identity and Hawaiian, you know, Hawaiians being prisoners or Hawaiians being whatever, come out of that 1893 to 1900 period. And so, long story short, again, those voices decide it's time to be heard, and then the family comes, and you make every effort you can to unite that story back with the family.
Wow, exciting times.
Yeah.
So we're at the 8:30 mark here on the East Coast. I want to turn it over, I guess, to our audience. If there's any burning questions for us. I'm not sure what's the relation with David in the Zoom as well.
So David looks like he may have just, his question may have been answered through all of our talk stories. So mahalo nui for that, David. And this is Stacy, and the voice never has a face, kalamai. But
this is our digital house manager extraordinaire, mahalo nui, Stacy.
Yeah, and just want to say the echoes of Deb's story and Katya's story and what Ron's gone through is what makes me so emotional about this movie, because I'd recently been at Mary Monarch with my grandmother in 19, and it was the first time we got to spend a lot of time together. And she kept turning around to me and saying, "Oh, what's this? What's that? What's this? What are they saying?" And so I was translating for her the Olelo and the Manao and all of the Mele and the Olis. And she, at the end of Mary Monarch, she turned around to me and really, in kind of a confessional way, started to tell the story about how we lost our culture, and how I know more than my parents' generation and her generation about the Hawaiian culture and Olelo, and she's, you know, it's something that she never considered before, but she's so moved by it, and I can't wait to share this film with her. Katya, thank you so much for doing it. I think it's touched many more people than you ever thought it would, but we are so proud of you.
Sorry, that was really beautiful.
You know, I want to add to Katya's story that for me, I watched the film, you know, when she first sent it, and for me, you know, before I got to what an incredible job she had done, my first hero of the film was her grandmother, and that's because, you know, I'm sure she'll like to, and that's because imagine what her and others that have spoken today understand what they persevered to get to, continuing at least to say something about Hawaii in the house, or, you know, reminding her, you know, her taking you guys to the beach. The kupuna have been speaking the whole time. We haven't been listening, and some folks like her and others continue to listen. So she's my hero.
You know, there's a whole life there on Wake Island that is just fascinating, because it's not with the main island chain, and yeah, there's like a whole treasure trove of stories there, I imagine, too, with Wake Island.
Yeah.
Okay, and what's the future for the film? It'll continue to do the festival circuit. Would it be available more widely in the future?
Yeah, sure, totally. I would love to share it in any way possible. Yeah.
Mike Kai.
Katya, do you, I was just wondering, you know, with your introduction to William and others, I imagine, do you feel like you have a larger family now? You know, that's, you know.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I really feel like just all of the ancestors that I didn't know, all of the people. I mean, the Hawaiian community is such a small little place. Even like Chris was saying, one of his family members was actually at that ceremony, and even just
Yeah, Alona.
Yeah, even just like being in touch with Halavai in New York City, like where I go to school, it's just, it makes me feel so much more surrounded by community in a way that I really had been missing. I remember, like, I used to walk around Sarah Lawrence in the springtime, like on the campus in New York, and when it like gets warmer, I'm always reminded of Hawaii. It really makes me miss it, and like just whether or not I'm going to be able to go back there soon. I remembered, like, I would walk around and just think like how much I missed that feeling of community. It felt like a lot of other people had that, and I was like, where are the people who understand my culture? I don't know, but now I feel like a lot more grounded in knowing that there's all sorts of Hawaiian people all over the mainland, wherever you go.
That's good.
Mahalo nui. And yeah, it's just exemplary of our namesake as well, of our hui, is to ho'o halavai, you know, and make these connections within our community. So wonderful that we could spotlight these stories today. And I think with that, we'll say a hui ho. And we have another event, the 21st. of this month, come up with the animation and digging into makahiki season. So we hope that you'll be able to join us again.
Chris?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just remembered one last thing. I didn't give the name of the kupuna who started this whole thing. I'd gotten so tied up in the story. But Uncle Talbot George was the kupuna who really made all of this happen. He's the one that took my interest. You know,
Lee McDonald's.
Yeah. Uncle Talbot. Yeah. So just to get his name out there.
Awesome. Mahalo nui.
Thank you so much, Hawai'i, for having us. Thank you, Chris,
Yes.
Lacey, and thank you, Ron, for coming. And thank you, Deb, for sharing your story. It was really beautiful.
Mahalo.
All right. So a copy of this virtual gathering should be archived at some point on our website. And don't forget to follow us, like, subscribe on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And yeah, keep in touch. Subscribe also to our email blast. We have a listserv if you'd like to keep up with our events on email. And mahalo nui.
Absolutely. And if anybody has any questions or wants to get anybody directly in contact for this program or anything else that we run with Halavai, please feel free to reach out to me, syoung@halavai.org. Be more than happy to. Ron had been so gracious as to share. So if you know any kumu who would like some cards, let us know and we'll be more than happy to pass on that information. Ahui ho, everybody.
Mahalo kako, mahalo Deb, Katya, Ron.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you.